Folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the massive existing and ongoing population boom in the poor peasant tribal societies of the world, and the change in the international definition of a refugee. A refugee used to be someone who was escaping, for example, war and persecution, but that's expanded. It's gradually expanded, but now it's fully expanded into anybody who just doesn't like it where they are. They can claim to be a refugee. This could be, I think I can get a better job over there, or I'm feeling poor, and I don't want to feel poor, so I want to go to a rich white Western country and freeload off them, and so on. So now the definition for a refugee is anybody who wants to move at any time. Now, if you're from a white country, then it's a tough gig to be considered a refugee. But if you're an illiterate African or Pakistani peasant, then you're pretty much a refugee, but by just your mere existence makes you a refugee. The fact you're upright and warm makes you a refugee. So with this change in definition and with the burgeoning population, just to sort of give you some idea, there's close to 1 billion people under the age of 35 living in just the Indian subcontinent. There's something in the region of 300 million Africans under the age of 30. Again, we're talking illiterate peasants here. We're not talking, PhD engineer doctors or something like that. We're talking illiterate peasants. And then if you add up all the others around the world, we're easily into the billions, and particularly Africa and the Indian subcontinent. So these people are wanting to come to the wealthy West, also the Arabic countries too, by the way, are wanting to come to the wealthy West and get lots of freebie handouts and be given hotel accommodation and free mobile phones. Who wouldn't want to come? I mean, if you come from a dirt poor country, but something sort of got me sort of going here. Just what we've had a few years of certainly this part of the subtropical, temperate rainforest type area that I live in here in Australia. We've had a few years of quite the springs and the summers have gone a little bit longer, and the winter has been quite mild, that sort of stuff. Not that there haven't been cold days, they have, but in the overall scheme of things, and there's been an abundance of food, and so as in naturally growing food. So the animal populations have, birds and marsupials and so on have increased quite substantially. Now, this winter so far has been quite harsh, and already you're seeing a real shortage of food. Trees that were normally thick with flowers or berries or edible leaves or something, they've been eaten out now. And I've noticed going around, you're starting to see the dead bodies of the marsupials and the birds that have become, just not enough food for them, or the competition for resources is so severe that they're killing each other, that sort of thing. So, but it's a much tighter market, if I can use that term, so that there was an overpopulation created for the abundance, because as soon as there's an extra few leaves to eat, then they procreate. That's just automatic. It just triggers procreation because they live right on the nature. They're right in the middle of the natural organic movement. If there's more food available, they over procreate. If then the food supply due to anything, it could be a forest fire or a longer or shorter season of growing, or harsher or milder winter, these sorts of things. This automatically feeds into. In fact, the last winter was so mild, or the one before that, I think, was so mild that a lot of critters were procreating actually during the winter as well, which is quite rare. It happens, but it's rare. So there's this overpopulation. Now they're dying off. The resources have ceased to be abundant. There are too many of them out there, not enough food to eat, they're starting to die. Now that's nature. When you're living on the nature line, if you're that's the natural corrective mechanism. It's harsh, it's brutal, it's unpleasant for us middle class folks sitting in our lounge rooms doing videos, but that's if you live on the nature line, that's how it happens. That's the reality. Now humans, particularly in the first world, have managed to become many steps removed from nature, certainly in the sense of food supply. Also, the advanced societies tend to be much more concerned about living within their means and resources. They're not simply looking at having another child because that just gives me one extra percentage chance of having a relative that's going to live, that can look after me when I get to old age. That's not the calculus that's being used in the West. Instead, it reverses. When I thought about having children, I thought, well, okay, can I afford the private school fees? Can I afford the college? Can I do this, and can I afford that? And can I always make sure that the Christmas tree is bulging with presents come Christmas time? There were many sort of economic calculations. On top of that, a time one. If I've got a job where I've got to work 1 million hours a week, will I have time to spend with the children? So those are the sort of considerations that and I'm sure many others go through. So having children isn't something that's just a matter of the probability of how many might survive, but the closer you are to the nature line, which is, say, the tribal societies in places like the Indian subcontinent and Africa are, the calculus of having children is quite, you have as many as you can, and especially in Africa, it's quite common for women to have multiple partners, as it is in a lot of the Pacific Islands and so on. Same in say the Indian subcontinent, where particularly, and through the Middle East, particularly where it's quite common for cousins to procreate and so on. So they have a high incidence of children with severe handicaps. So they have to keep on procreating, and so that some won't have handicaps, and they'll be the ones that'll look after the family plot of land when the folks get too old. So there's a very different sort of thing now. The West has sort of interfered with the natural order of things. Because the sophistication of these people hasn't changed, they still live on the nature line. The difference is that outside agencies now come in and given medical care and artificially given food and so on, so these people aren't changing their sophistication level to deal with the help they're getting. They're still living on the nature line attitude-wise, but now they're massively over procreating to way beyond what their area of land or piece of land can support or ever hope to support. Ethiopia being a classic case in point. The population of Ethiopia is if you look at the capacity of the land to generate the food and so on, they're between 50 and 60% overpopulated. So if the West was to withdraw all its aid and just leave Ethiopia completely to its own devices, you would see mass starvation on a scale that would be almost apocalyptic in its proportions. So really the West failed to make the African society more sophisticated. Instead, it just gave this artificial help, the food and the medicine. This meant that more children were surviving. It meant that fewer children were dying. And that because of the food supply and the help, artificial help, external help that they could never have organized themselves, the area has now overpopulated. Now, what this has done is created, just in the Indian subcontinent, Africa alone, you're talking in total something around 1 billion with a B, dirt poor fucking illiterate peasants who are all being, United Nations NGO stirred and agitated up, who think they can all move to the West. And given the numbers they're arriving in, there doesn't appear to be any will in the West, and the globalists certainly want this to stop it. So ultimately, if you look at over another 50-year cycle, it continues, white people will be totally replaced, or there'll be such a tiny minority as to be near irrelevant. And I've mentioned a number of times Indians salivate. They go into a swoon over the thought that in Australia, for example, they'll be in the majority in Australia over the next 25 years, and they'll be calling the shots. If those white people think they're still going to be in charge or in control, they got another thing coming. We're going to be in fucking charge, and we'll tell them how it's going to be. And you already see that now. And there's been a recent rejigging of the trade treaty with India just to make it easier for the Indians to get rid of their surplus population and send it to Australia. Now, it wouldn't matter if Australia was getting all the high IQ, real doctors and engineers, but we're not. We're getting some are, but for the most part, we're getting the peasants and the freeloaders and the shysters and that sort of stuff. And so I don't see that Australia's particularly benefiting. I think out of the million or so, or million plus, in fact, be close to 2 million Indians that are in Australia, I doubt if even 100,000 are making any worthwhile contribution to the nation and the economy. But coming back to the issue here of a serious effort needs to be made to try and make these African societies, or any third world tribal society, far more, and wealth is one way of doing this, far more sophisticated in terms of their view of procreation. Because as soon as you put an extra slice of bread on the peasant table, they will procreate, and their procreation will always outstrip the food supply. So you've got this absurd situation where the population is growing geometrically, as in 2, 4, 16, and that's and so the food supply can never keep up, and as much as the West is doing everything it can to throw food at these places and medicines and other things, the casualty rate is still high. But given the procreation rate is so high, they're constantly in this situation where there's always far too many people for the resources in the area, whether they be domestic resources or internationally provided resources. So on this basis, the time bomb, the pressure cooker is constantly being primed by these tribal societies, because they exist mentally so close to nature, that again, you put one slice of bread on the table and they're procreating it away. And these masses of people are also being encouraged by the United Nations and the NGOs and the various agitating classes to all come to the West, with the help of the World Economic Forum and all these other people. So we're in a spiral of death as long as this goes on. And I see, just using again the analogy of the animals in the area here, that as soon as the abundance of resources dries up or levels off or pulls back, and suddenly you're seeing large numbers of deaths, as I'm seeing around with the birds and the mammals and so on. But you look at that in a human sense, where these tribal societies again are living maybe one step further away from nature than the animals are, but only one step, not like the several steps that the advanced West, industrialized West is. Then we're looking at, we're within a hair's breadth of a major disaster. Either way you look at it, it's either a disaster in as much as there's mass starvation in Africa and Pakistan and so on, or the Indian subcontinent. There's either mass starvation there, or there's a mass exodus of people to the West and complete destruction of the West's financial and industrial ecosystem. Either way you go, it's going to be mass destruction. And I don't know whether that's been fully realised. You're being with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.